Welcome back to the Corporate Governance Program. I'm Amir Qureshi. In our episode today, we are talking with Mr. Raziur Rahman, the Chairman of Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan, the SECP. Mr. Rahman, in addition to what the SECP is doing, what role do you think the institutional investors can play in promoting good governance?
Institutional investors have two roles. They are either lenders to companies or they are owners and have a certain stake in the companies that they think are good companies. In both cases, institutions play a very important role. If they're owners of a stake in the company, they have the nominee directors, and then the onus is on the institutions to ensure that the right person is put in as a director on the board of the investee companies, who are going to give the time, have the capacity, knowledge, experience, and the capacity to make a change, so that the institutions only put people who can make a change, can understand what's going on the board, and is assertive enough to have his say where he believes he's right. On the other hand, we've also got the institutions, either banks or DFIs and other investment banks, who are lenders. There they can play a very important role, either by insisting that the companies that they lend to follow all the good corporate governance practices, because this is where the company's credit rating improve if they're following good corporate governance practices. So either they can stipulate that as one of the preconditions for giving them a loan, or indeed they can reduce the rate of interest or the charge that they charge to the company because of a company that is following good corporate governance practices as opposed to companies that are not following the practices. So there is an incentive that the banks are giving to the company to follow good corporate governance practices. And this is really the area where we must all realize that unless you do this as a body, as a country, as a nation, and insist on all companies following the codes of corporate governance, we'll find that this will not get implemented in a hurry.
Mr. Rahman, given the pattern of shareholdings in most Pakistani companies, do you think the code and the legislation provide sufficient protection for minority shareholders?
This is an area that we've been working on for some time, and last year in the finance bill we put in a number of provisions, and I'll just recount a few. Today, based on Finance Bill 2007, a minority shareholder or a group of minority shareholders who own collectively 20% of the shares can apply to SCP for a special audit of the company. So I think this is very important protection for the minority shareholders, so that if the majority is not running the company properly, is not declaring the results properly, is not giving them access to accounts, they can actually ask SCP to have a special audit done. And there's a case that we are working on today where we are in fact going to appoint a special auditor. In addition to this, a minority shareholder who owns 12.5% of the shares can become a director of the company within a year max. So at the next AGM, whenever that is going to happen, he can apply to the company and become a director on the board of that company, so he can protect his investment. I think both these provisions are such that the minority shareholders are going to be given a certain amount of protection, and I think this is important. I must also say that the minority shareholders as a body, they have to flex their muscles, they have to get together, and they have to play the due role, either in electing through proxies a person who is worthy of the vote. I think that's what the minority shareholders have to do as well.
One of the key issues raised by some of our guests on this program in regards to the Code of Corporate Governance relates to the issues surrounding internal audit. The internal audit function is not given the importance or protection that it deserves in the Code of Corporate Governance. Do you think this is an area that you need to look at further?
Well, as I've said earlier, because of the code, there is an audit committee of the board to which the internal auditor reports. Now, this is a very important change that is taking place. But I think where we are missing is that the internal auditor is not appointed by the board. And yes, you're right that we've not given specific provisions as to how the internal auditor is to be appointed or removed from his job. I think we need to give protection over here, and inshallah fairly soon we will be looking, this is under consideration, and we will work towards ensuring that the internal auditor is given some protection if he reports against the management of the company.
Do you believe a system of good corporate governance is just as important for smaller organizations? And how can we go about promoting this in smaller or family-owned organizations? Do you think the SECP has a role to play in this?
I think smaller organizations will also realize that there's a dividend to be had for adopting or by adopting good corporate governance practices. And yes, it is something in the future that SCP may get involved with. At this point in time, I think we should concentrate on the bigger companies to start with and the public sector organizations, that we are also looking at a code for them, so that these organizations which are large make an impact on the stakeholders and the economy of the country should follow proper corporate practices.
We now need to take a short commercial break, but we'll be back with more of the Corporate Governance Program. Don't go away.